all know, we have a little bit different messaging this year. So we've got new language with new swag. We've got 200 years at our disposal of Colgate to be using for different things. So we thought it would be a good idea to have a quick brainstorm of how we can kind of integrate new talking points, new ways of what we're thinking about and how we're languaging things in our information section. How can we bring that to the high school visit? So what are some things that you all have noticed that are different about the language that we're using, how we're articulating Colgate facts that we're sharing? Drew can't talk. Go. Drew's a ringer that we can pull in.
Drew's in the last 5% of this conversation.
Don't arrest me.
What's different about our messaging?
More swag.
We got a big, small place going. Small, big place. I'm not ever sure which one to agree.
The order may be secondary to the content there.
Okay. What else?
I think the vision statement is more forward with really identifying what they want us to be promoting or identifying. I think that's always been a conversation point about what do we talk about everything, whereas the vision statement I think is clear, bringing out some things that we do well.
Like what?
I think bringing sustainability to the forefront. I think bringing, even though we're not there yet, like the re-emphasis on the arts and sort of the development of the arts. I'm still struggling a little bit with that because the ideals for where we want to be don't match where we currently are. So there's some growth there. We've always been a little humble, I think, in even our marketing about what we're really good at. So I think there's just a little bit more distinction in some of those areas.
I think the vision statement is also like very aspirational and like Lynn said in terms of like focusing on things that we want to have, not necessarily things that always exist. Like we talk a lot about like engaging with people from a lot of perspectives, which I don't necessarily think always happens, but it's something that we want to happen more.
Keaton, you and I were talking just yesterday, and we talked about, what is the word that I said? It's a little highbrow. Yeah, I think it's some of what I talked about. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing to be intellectual, but I think one of the things we have to be cognizant of, and something I'll talk about in my presentation, is how does this connect with everyone and every audience. And so I think trying to balance the aspirations, the goals, the vision, and the intellectual pieces with colloquial language, talking to regular people, connecting with students, and it not coming off as we're over here and you're over here.
Colloquial swag. That is our brand now.
Yeah. Focusing on Benton Hall and some of the resources and opportunities with that. If people want any more information about that too, the tour guide manual for Benton Hall does have a lot of information.
I like that the residential commons is here. You know, we've talked about it sort of in piecemeal and like it's coming. So this is one of those pieces that rather than it being, we're in the reality phase at this point of the residential commons, and I'm still waiting to sort of see, this year with like everyone there, but the dorms are really taking form, like that gives a substance to that piece and the student experience, I think now with everyone really being an integral part of that, and the housing assignments changing this year allows us to have a really good base for that conversation.
I think there's an emphasis and eye towards the aesthetic kind of part. This is clearly a beautiful campus and a beautiful location. And I think we were talking about that, but I think it's just even more kind of targeted in some of the new language in a way. Aesthetic is sort of the name.
It's easy. Yeah, kind of broadening from that, how has the way that we've talked about where we are changed? Asking you to do critical thinking skills today. Nobody expected that.
I I think for me it's a move from, there was the quote, like we're in the middle of everywhere, which is kind of tongue-in-cheek to the value of, like more so the value of the location in a way that I think is more authentic and real.
I think we're being more thoughtful about how we talk about the connected to the world piece too. Like that's always been part of our session and part of our message, but I think we're emphasizing that more as part of the big small place too. Small big place.
Do you have any specific examples or like phrases that you like to use when you talk about that? Or that exemplify what you're talking about?
I don't know if there are particular phrases that come to mind, but just talking about the ways that we're both bringing people to campus and connecting our students by bringing people and resources here and also sending students out into the world.
There's some great examples of work that people do in the Upstate Institute, and some people went to the research presentations a couple weeks ago, and there were some Upstate people there, but if you were to go on the Upstate Institute webpage, you'll get more examples. And then the examples that exist every year, but I don't think they can ever be overstated, which is that, I like to say, there are some students at Colgate who aren't satisfied with just impacting other people's lives. They want to save other people's lives, and they volunteer as with the local ambulance or with the fire department. So, you can really come to a small town and leave here 4 years later knowing that you've had a substantial impact on the way in which life is conducted here.
Any final thoughts?
It's a different way that we talk about our faculty.
Superstars.
Yeah. We've never really touted our faculty before in that kind of a lens. Like we've always said they have good connections, they care about our students, they challenge our students, but talking to them using words like superstars, celebrities in their field, top of their game, and giving real examples of what they did. Like I talked about Joe Levy and his NASA funding in Shanghai, and this girl came up to my table and was like, how do I get involved in that program? And I had her to explain to her that it wasn't a program, but it's something that sticks with people. And talking about there's a public school in Fairfield County. Every year I go there, Gary Minier is kids who come from Colgate, the difference between them and every other liberal arts school like you guys is the relationship they have with their professors and how different it is. And I think the more we talk about, Brian Casey's focus on the aesthetic also comes with his focus on strengthening the faculty and making sure that they can continue to do what they do best. I think it's different.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. You go first.
Have we gotten, and I apologize, I may have just missed this in email, but have we gotten, and I know that the interns were working on speakers on campus and stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. Coming soon?
Yes, coming soon.
Okay.
Coming attractions.
Yeah, they're doing research on superstar faculty examples and also speakers.
That's great.
People who can.
Great.
So cool.
Great.
Messaging, Guru, anything to add?
I mean, it's great to hear most of the things that we talked about when we developed the session being reflected back. So, no, I think that sense of scale on top of what we have already talked about really well, I think is what really transforms this in every section. So, especially I think about that faculty piece. We've always talked about how our faculty are accessible and they live in the community and you get to know them on a personal basis. But now we're talking about how that plus they're on CNN and they're at international conferences and they're celebrities in their field. So it's combining those two, the scale and that community piece, which I think we've always done really well.
Pulitzer Prize winning professors who teach their own classes, they have a TA for them.
Yeah.
And
And have students over their house.
And in some cases, those classes, not this semester, I just checked, but in some cases, those classes include first-year students. How many other places can you go to where you could learn from a Pulitzer Prize-winning professor as a first-year student?
And to that point, I guess you made a comment, Julie, that I wanted to follow up on it, talking about what faculty do best. I think I always highlight the fact that they come to a place like this because they want to teach.
Yeah.
And so I think when we think about what they do best, it's not the other stuff. They teach best, and they're here because they want to teach. Like, they have these other things that make them superstars in their field, but I think at the heart of it, they come to a place like this, a community like this, because they want to teach. Because if they wanted to do the other stuff, there are other places where they can do that. So I think highlighting that is always important as well, because you could have the first-year student that is with that professor, but also as a senior, is that opportunity to have that leading scholar who's going to know you and write that recommendation for grad school or your first job or your internship or whatever, because they know you because they want to teach and engage with students.
Yeah. And I think that's where connecting with the, like, I think about places where Colgate's really well known. I'm thinking about you in New Jersey and Westchester and the places we go where these kids have already visited twice. So they might have an idea of these things, and that's where the actual illustrations are the only thing that we can do to make it different. You know, the student examples where they can relate to someone from their high school or their region. And it's a lot of work to, like, not only get that part down, but then to build in all of the examples that are relevant to each region.
All right, well, because we want everyone to have something to take away from the session, the next thing we're going to do is ask everyone to pair off with their buddies again, and we are going to ask you to work on elevator pitches that now take into account all of these things, because everyone probably already has their Colgate elevator pitch down pat to this point, but making sure that we're keeping fresh, that we're staying in line with these themes, that we're integrating them into what we've been saying about Colgate for at least a year, if not many or several years, that we're kind of integrating all of these ideas. If you want to do several different ones for your regions that you have that are going to be different from each other, that might be a good project to have. We're going to give you probably about 10 or 15 minutes to do this, so that's probably a good idea. And if you just want to figure out with your buddies, and feel free to move around or stay or whatever you want to do. What do you want to do? You want to go out?
Sure.
30 to 60 seconds.
30 to 60 seconds.
Are you guys breaking up with us?
Oh, do we want to do it?
I don't know.
We had admission pairs, but, you know,
I'm just gonna bring her a little bit.
Trade.
use that with our education.
To the
For your.
Can I take company chairs? There's company chairs.
Yes.
Okay.
I just spotted the couch. Those look more comfortable than our current sitting environment.
We could keep making off with the
Big clears, I know. They cleared out for us.
Last year.
great.
And just started.
Always set an alarm.
And I had like
Feel that we're good.
3 or 4 kids. One of them actually is here now, so I knew I could tell one was really interesting.
Who is that?
How to change your
I was
visit.
just looking at the list for
Blonde hair.
We're in Joseph now.
I can picture her, and she's volunteering.
I never heard of Colgate before. I got Colgate. I'm just trying to think how to change it. I don't have to draw on my hands sort of thing. I probably use that. For going to become a sponge. Yeah, I usually
Yes,
start.
we're not.
We just remember really
Really easy.
Nice.
And so, in it for about classroom,
I like using
probably
it.
close to this size, and, there are 3 or 4 of us. And 10
They're all
minutes
about the
into
fun show.
it, someone walks in and
Same thing,
says,
Most of the kids I meet.
lockdown drill is a combination of last
just
year,
like, don't talk about
it's right when all the North Korean tension was at its peak.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Remember?
I didn't think about that because it's a bigger deal in Hawaii. Yeah.
So that's what it was last year, but there wasn't a lockdown last year. And so I'm really sorry, but we're going to be bringing in a whole lot of other students, and you can't go anywhere, no one can go anywhere until the drill is over.
Is there bringing people into your
Yeah,
group?
and so there will be about 75 or 80 kids in the classroom, grades 9 through 12.
Yeah.
And then one of the counselors came running over and said, really sorry, we didn't know grades, we really told you we would schedule you. What I think I'll do is I'll tell the kids to stop talking to their friends and why don't you just talk about the college application process, bearing in mind you got 9 through 12.
Nope.
You know who the ones interested in Colgate are, almost everybody else is, and so just kind of make a general.
What an opportunity.
So apparently I didn't scare them.
That's incredible. So we should expect some more applicants from Puno next couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of.
If I was listening,
Yeah.
like if I was.
I should look at your schedule, where you park, and where you go to the college council, and where you speak. Those are different walks.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And then they'll just say, oh, you're not interested.
It's bigger than, I would say, probably half the college campuses.
Really? I didn't know that.
And you can't park.
Wow, that's
Good to know. I have another question.
But I like.
But that reminds me of what in California.
Yeah, that's really nice.
In California, I would always have
It is very nice.
schools, and I would always try to schedule, individual groups of students, and then throw me into an average classroom in California. And I happen to be constant, especially in the Central Valley.
So Colgate is a small liberal arts institution located in upstate New York. We have just under 3,000 students on our campus, which is located in the lovely rural town of Hamilton, New York's population of approximately 4,000. So it's very much a place that has a community feeling, a community spirit, deep connections to one another, but at the same time we have these incredible resources
Oh, really?
for our students. Like sort of R1 level research
It depends on the downtown traffic.
R1 level
And
research
Google.
facilities that we have on our campus that go directly to undergraduates, as we do not have candidates on campus. Very much on campus, or just trying to make sure it's very broad. We can also have hours or very much such as
When you come in the
we try to
car,
watch through for her analysis and start with who's also have
What is that?
or
What is that?
yeah, I have every mortgage I do not have
you go to
I
sign
think the further the
Is there-
location you can do that.
it's
yeah.
10, 15 minute walk to get back to work. Yeah, so that's absolutely key.
And then below the.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, I feel like
Part of my problem is that I do very few like college.
Right, you're grazing over a lot of things.
It's kind of a
And then I think I'm doing so unfair in California.
I think this is most.
So I haven't done fair
Oh, I
for
think
like
there's-
the.
When you have,
college
when you
year,
really,
like,
you have 60 seconds to tell a student everything they want to know about Colgate. Then they're like, oh, I haven't been there so much, I'm not going to pitch.
in 2
I
years.
want
Yeah, this is other areas.
And then invite them to, we can like pull in the spirit of these things.
So
that
you're
are
trying to like.
Exactly, no, I mean, again, saying, big small place where campus, where students are able to work.
Yeah, that might be a
It takes 20 minutes just to go to the driveway.
Really?
You're going up and down, and you go
Instead of having that.
on top.
Yeah.
Okay,
But like,
good to know.
people would feel better
Trying
on
to
college
make
days,
sure I
like,
got it.
residential campus, we guarantee 100.
Yeah.
Because I feel like most of the things I do where people don't promote a lot of Colgate is like.
That's what might be able to
it's
work
everywhere.
one.
Well, stop. If they want to hear, like if they want to hear more about community.
Like I really want it in a situation.
I'm
I think
not
what I
encouraging
believe
you
is
to drop any
More
of
of
this.
a
I
bodies
think
that
it's
I
good.
honestly, I feel like this is like important part of our I'm like, it's a no, I agree, and I agree that I think
Yeah.
that these sorts of pieces are great. They're not going to be like everything. Yeah,
No,
there's
this
going to be the
won't-
students
they're gonna
that
want you to
ask,
stay for
like a
lunch.
lot of students are going to ask.
And then keep
Oh,
presentation after lunch.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so I'll have to move later.
And then this is on the other side of the block.
I also think that if I try to think about I mean, this is a session, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a session. I don't have time to, even in
You really have to go over to the other
I
side.
just think about ways though
Yeah.
that quick, like, how many students we have. Sort of like, can take some different spirit.
Yeah.
No, I, but also, yeah, I also just like this monster thing. I feel like last year when I was figuring out just the problem and stuff. I mean, at least now I have actually been yeah. And I also feel like I take a different approach because I'm share.
Yeah. I'm glad that I have been able to put it out there so many times in my role though, because I felt like
Lunch
you
version, that's
definitely have a
good.
better
Yeah.
understanding, like, story.
I struggle with the.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like that's,
city thing because.
I agree with that, like, point.
I know, like,
Oh.
still do
It's
a
kind of
short
like-
saying on story.
Are you
Like,
staying
you can
where
really
I
talk
stay?
to other staff
Yeah,
members,
And I get why
and
you
like,
say,
oh, yeah. Like, I know all this sustainability classes.
Oh, good.
And like stuff that Josh is telling me about the outdoor ed. I did.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, cover.
Research.
It's great. I'm glad. I'm happy.
Like the professors come on in.
How was the,
Okay, like stuff.
it's actually been really good.
Wasn't necessarily addressing the sense
Everybody
of
please help fresh catch.
Yeah, yeah, that's, I think
I'm glad that
That's-
made it. Yeah.
that's very close to this.
that, I think that's
Yeah.
one.
It's Christy.
Such an easy thing.
All of her stuff is moved in. She's coming in on Saturday.
Exactly, so, yeah, so she shows, and so maybe you could just move up into the shows, like,
We didn't have a good
because people will still be listening.
Oh, no, and this is the last one.
I think like, because I like the way that you articulate
Yeah.
the two-piece really quickly, I think that was good.
Wait,
It looks like they
well, I'm
were-
going.
You guys have 1 more minute left, so wrap up your elevator pitches.
This is pretty skinny, you're looking at.
So I tried to convince my family to go.
This is very good.
So,
This is,
but no, we definitely should all make time.
Jesus.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I am. Is that the west side of the island?
Yes. And
So I really want to sit down and like
you'll be every
look at the school,
bit of this,
think about how many students I'm at.
which is right by
Even like with Georgia, like he brought up really fun up my number one private, like I visit one of my schools, but I also visit some kids that are coming from the other district.
Well,
And I
even
don't
when
wanna
you're
use
at
it
private
so
schools,
much.
not everyone
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, no,
That's,
absolutely,
direct,
absolutely. But I feel like even that, like having.
And you
may
not be able to.
Yeah.
Is that what you usually do?
I went to Dallas.
To Dallas, yeah.
It's not always the case.
No,
I'll
I
have to
understand,
figure
like,
out
there's
the-
plenty of students that are, they're 100% on there and are.
Yeah,
That
that,
Yeah, change it
Yeah.
as a demographic, rather
Yeah, but I mean, like,
It's important not to make those decisions as well because of biases. Yeah, like, so
yeah, this is where I took a little break before ours, so.
I don't, yeah, I think we're gonna take it.
Yeah. We're good.
I have some meetings back there.
I was talking with, so there was someone, about to be an 18 grad, who just got a position in their office, that invited them to have a position for. So I just had a call with them last night.
Okay.
I think I scared him a little bit about travel.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, I do kind of like to have a little bit of structure in my life. And I don't like interacting with people all the time. He was like, don't worry, there are some really serious introverts who do this. It will be okay.
It was such a funny thing with Julie and I at the sizable Zoom break. But I
She's not an introvert though, I don't think. This person.
Careful where you apply ED, but it matters.
What was your school?
And we'd like it to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah, just in case you were wondering.
What were you, you were 6, right?
I was
5.
9 on the introverts.
So when we started the labor session, technically we're supposed to end now and then
No,
have
that's
a
fine.
15-minute break.
Well, that's fine.
Special ed event.
Yeah. That's fine. Actually, not in a bad.
Thank you all very much for all your good work, and thanks, special thanks to you for putting all this together.
Oh, it was a travel team effort.
Right.
Travel team.
Thanks, travel team.
Yeah. I love the recording.
I don't know why I thought you were
That
on touch screen.
Okay, great. So now we would like to have maybe one volunteer from each sort of pod who feels prepared to give their elevator pitch to inspire the rest of us.
Who'd like to be our representative?
Who wants to be a guinea pig?
All the tours are in the lobby. I don't want to
That's fair.
Who wants to be a guinea pig, which was the failed sister game show to Monster and Millionaire.
Well, I'll jump in. We did not, I don't really want to, I wanted to give other people an opportunity, but no one's jumping. Okay, so we have a great little, that's not going to work. Okay, so it's going to be on the floor. We did not go through actual talking points. Keaton's going to be my holder. But what we talked about, we spent most of our time really talking about location specific and really getting the students in the room. You have to obviously know where you are, but determining whether that location specific piece. Some of us do things differently based on location, some people don't. But really trying to get at in starting the conversation with getting feedback from the students first. So we did a lot, we ran out of time, like as we were brainstorming. So basically we talked about finding out what's important to the students, setting the location specific, making sure they know who we are. You've got to do that before we can determine what's important to them. And then we target the information session based on that specific feedback, having the high school visit be much more interactive. Letting them know if they know Colgate students, alumni, any opening question to have them set the energy. And then we actually got stuck on this last part and really didn't develop our whole elevator pitch because we were talking about the leverage and intro of early decision apps. So we really didn't fully execute the exercise because we got stuck on what I think is a really important point, how we leverage that conversation about early decision apps in the high school visit. So we don't really have an elevator pitch. But
I think you bring up some important points.
Exactly, we have some important points. But basically it's reading the audience, knowing where you are, doing some type of interactive piece to see what's most critical to them. And then one thing we came across, one thing we all agreed on is that the high school visit is definitely more about bullet points and not the details, and then let them that come out through the Q&A. And then we just got stuck on that.
Can I ask a question or throw something out there? Thinking about ED. So we travel September to October, roughly some in August, and we're thinking about if this is mostly seniors in the room and we're giving them, say, a month or two to decide, I love you and this is your place. One, how often is it that you fall in love that quick? Two, should we be doing a better job with juniors to push ED? When we think about spring travel, and we think about communication and messaging, is it, yes, we need to leverage ED in those conversations, but with our juniors, shouldn't we begin that process then so they can fall in love over 6 months?
I mean, for me, the reaction to that is twofold. It's going to depend a little bit on the region, but I know most regions I go, like every high school I go into, at least 75% of the kids in every single one of my high school visits are applying early somewhere. Because I'm in Westchester, I'm in the private schools, independent schools in Boston. They're all going early somewhere. And they're hearing from other reps that ED is important and there's a preference, and we haven't been saying that. So when they're hearing like, oh, Colgate's good, I can hang back, they have ED too.
Yep.
Versus a message they're hearing from BC, Middlebury, Dartmouth, other places where early is going to give you, you know, early decision is important to us. I think we just need to be in that conversation. I don't think we need to promise anything, but I think we've been humble and a little relaxed because we don't look at demonstrated interest. And we talked a little bit about that language, but I think even a junior hearing it in a high school visit, that Colgate values students who love us and want to be there. I don't think this is an oversale. I think it's just we haven't really said any of this before, and I think we need to start saying it.
And I also want to feel empowered to answer this question, and I think the answer is yes. But so when I say we have a strong preference for ED, parents and counselors say so big students have a better chance of getting an ED.
Yes.
And Gary has said on the record in a webinar that is on YouTube public that a student who is normally waitlisted will often be admitted under the early decision plan.
Yes.
That is verbatim, like on the internet in the public sphere.
Okay, that makes me feel good about like, because I never want to just like promise kids stuff, and I it's kind of like I just want to vet that we can use that kind of language and just feel good about it, like, and not.
And the reason we can feel good about it is because, you know, I think sometimes we can hear that as we're gaining admissions numbers and we're trying to enroll our whole class ED to drive up our yield and blah, blah, blah. Only we are, well, some sophisticated parents and students are thinking like that, but they're thinking about themselves. And the truth is, if you look at like our student satisfaction survey results and success surveys and all this stuff, ED students take advantage of resources on campus at a higher rate, they graduate in 4 years at a higher rate, like they're simply more successful, and part of that is, it's not because they're stronger, but it's because they want to be here, we weren't a backup. And I will just straight up say that and say like, we don't need to justify this in any way, but like this is why ED is important to us, because these students want to be here. And for a rural campus like Colgate, that's absolutely critical, so that's why we give a preference for ED.
But again, going back to my earlier point, like everybody's not in Westchester County. Everybody's not that student, so thinking about the juniors, like if we're thinking about outreach, we're thinking about inclusion work, I'm not gonna walk into X Uplift High School and tell them they don't have a chance as a senior. Because they're not thinking it's ED. And so I need to do that with my juniors, and we need to do that with our juniors if we're thinking about how do we diversify our pool, but also how do we create an inclusive, like enrolling group, so that it's not all just the people who have known since they were born and they were coming to Colgate. Like, that's
exactly. Totally understand. And after we get through this exercise and take a break, we're going to talk about the counselor piece. And I actually think that counselor conversations about early decision are actually a tad bit more important than even the student, because you're not necessarily going to move a student in the fall of their senior year in Texas. Like you're just not. You know, because if I haven't visited already, like early's off the table. And at the end of the day, we need apps. We definitely need apps. But there's a couple different things we've been talking about, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but we're on record. Gary left. I was going to ask him if it's okay to share this, but I'm going to share it. Mark Neustadt was hired by President Casey to do a basically review of what steps Colgate could take to increase our academic, our selectivity, basically decrease accept rate. And obviously there's two ways to do that. One is to get more applications and increase your lower your accept rate. The other is to increase early decision offers. And his proposal, Drew, correct me if I'm wrong, I think is that we would be closer to 50, that we try to get to 50% of our class through early decision this year. And he thinks, like many of our peer institutions, we should be closer to 55%. And that's why when we've talked about, like very broadly a long time ago, like what can we do differently? And it's hard because there's a lot of competing factors, but how do we increase or excite Colgate and Focus students to feel the confidence of early decision? Like we had brainstormed a long time ago about like, do we do more with financial aid? Is it hands-on? Like do they, you know, because it can't just be we admit more majority full-pay students early decision and then regular decision becomes diversifying our class, because that's really hard to do. We've got to move, and it's not going to happen overnight, but we've got to, in some of these tracks, be more aggressive in terms of how we're looking at geographic diversity, cultural diversity, aid, non-aid. Like, we've been resistant. We're a little bit softer in early decision with aid, but we haven't been super flexible with aid and early decision. If we want to secure diversifying our pool, increasing our increasing our ED numbers, we need to think about how we're using aid in early decision. So, you know, because it, like you said, it can't just be kids from Westchester. That's not going to help Colgate.
And we also need to, if that's the case, I think in our messaging in some of our visits with diverse communities, stress that we're need aware, we meet full need, but we have a budget. And there's more money available to you early in the year than later. And that's something actually at the program I was just at that we explicitly said to this one group, but I don't know that everyone is saying that.
Right.
And not to say that there's not money later, but if you're interested and you want the money, ED is going to be a great way for you to go because there's just more money available.
Yeah. And I think we can feel confident to know that our packaging holds up really well for families that have a need. Like, we tend to be a really competitive package for them.
And I feel good about the money they get. It's just a matter of everybody feeling comfortable and confident to say that to a group of black and brown students. You just gotta be able to say it.
And it's, I mean, so much of it is gauging, you know, where your students are. So the scenario you brought up of the parent who's asking about, do you give a preference for ED? Like, those are families who, like you said, Jameer, have been thinking about college since, like,
what
conception.
they went to.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, you're pregnant, let's start to college.
Yeah, exactly.
But it starts with a preschool enrollment. You gotta take that right.
New York City private's true?
Yeah. No, in my New York City privates, I asked them all last year how many of your kids go ED. They said we haven't had a kid not apply ED somewhere for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Literally every single kid at the school applies ED.
Because they start their college search process when they're 13. Yeah.
So, but then I go to charter schools and I go to public schools and they're just at such a different place that honestly some of those conversations, ED doesn't necessarily come up because they're thinking, do I even go away from the city for college? Do I, you know, like, you guys are really expensive. So we're talking about financial aid, we're talking about application process, like ED is kind of, you know, I'll talk to the counselors in those situations about ED.
Right.
And that's where they can hopefully advise those students, but we're just at a different place.
And you know, you've got, it's like everything. It's like, how do you start your session? You're reading the situation, and there might be some places you go that early decision isn't appropriate to talk about because you're at, like you said, you're at such a foundational level about what is liberal arts, residential, how do you actually get here? Like, you're in the logistics of what type of major you would have, that's so far down the road. Maybe that's never a conversation, or it's at least a follow-up conversation down the road.
Exactly.
But I do know in our school visits previously, or when we take a break and get into the counselor conversation, we've never really had early decision on that short list of like things specifically to talk about. And I think when it's appropriate, given the expectations for our office, this is not like Lynn thinking this is necessarily a good thing ethically, and it makes me a little sick to my stomach, but we have expectations being placed upon us, and there is movement, and we have data. I mean, Middlebury's taking 55–56% of their class early decision. The thing I don't like about losing the list share is we're not going to be able to see who they're taking, because that was always fun to be like, wow, feel pretty good about what we're doing, because it is crazy landscape in terms of what schools are doing in early. But we are, even though I feel uncomfortable saying 47–48% of our class, there are a significant number of our peer schools that are closer to 55.
You got a point?
It's pretty much been covered. I was just going to say about the same thing if I'm going to, you know, the Metro Atlanta Fair and I'm not talking to students that have even a background with their parents just looking at schools. You know, I really like bringing up that point about being closer in the financial aid pool and things like that because, you know, a lot of the students that I talked to even last year, you know, the concept of ED was not even on their radar.
Sure.
And since a lot of them are seniors, they're not even getting that time as a junior to, you know, have those conversations. It's important that we think about that. And then also, just something that Michaela and I were talking about is really being cognizant of the fact that we don't, how do I put this? Being cognizant that our languaging is something that can be approachable to a group, especially if we have a high school visit. You brought up a really good point. If I'm visiting a private school, we don't know which students are full paying, which students aren't, or which students have different backgrounds. And, you know, thinking about that sort of information as well, making sure that we, you know, don't assume that, you know, depending on where we are, every student has been thinking about college since they, you know, were born or something like that.
Is that still a good looking quick, or you take it off?
What?
Are you interested in learning about need?
It's on there.
Is it?
Financial aid
Because
is
if
on
you're
there.
ever somewhere where you are using the like inquiry card and like, I would like just like as they came back, I would like swoop really through.
I think I would challenge I mean, I think it's important to talk about financial aid in every session, even if no one checks the box, because I think you want to send that message that we do care about how different race and class interactions happen on our campus. The class interaction is definitely just an issue at Colgate, so I think it's good to challenge, even if it's a group of full pay students, to talk about financial aid and the importance of that for Colgate. I think all of those messages just help to send. I think it's important to always talk about it because you never know who's in the group. You never know. You always want to make sure you cover that.
And I want to do a job of picking this up, but a lot of full pay students care about the class makeup of the school. So even if it doesn't directly apply to them, like, it will have an impact on how they think about Colgate.
How much time do we have left? Because we have more things that we can do, but we could also.
I mean, this is the base of what we need to do on the road.
Mm-hmm.
So we can, I mean, I had 15 minutes for a break, but this also overlaps into my piece that's next about the counselor session. Counselor's segment. So I'd be interested, do you guys come up with an elevator pitch?
No.
Okay.
And I think the reason we didn't was, one, we had a lot of questions about making sure that the way that we approached our use of language was something that's accessible to the different groups that we target, and then also we have some very different regions, and so, you know, I'm not going to I don't have to put as much effort in Long Island as I do in North Carolina, you know, so that I feel like this is something that requires a lot more time. But I will say, very generally, I did this last year and I think it still can be pretty applicable. I would just say, liberal arts institution, upstate New York, just under 3,000 students. We want students to have an interdisciplinary experience, whether it's studying in multiple academic fields, engaging with interesting professors, research opportunities, internships, on-campus study, or just getting to engage with students from all over the country, all over the globe. That was my pretty much one-stop shop. And then, what are you interested in? Because a lot of these points are, I hesitate to bring them up in the pitch because I don't want them to be glossed over. If there's a student that is really interested in internships, then I can take the time to explain to them about Benton Hall, and they're going to remember that, as opposed to me saying, and we have these facilities, Benton Hall, moving on. So that's just kind of how I approach the pitch, but I guess it still, again, depends. If I go to high school with 2 students, I'm going to approach it differently than if I've got 25 at Bethlehem Central. So.
Elevator pitch I think of as like a college fair tool, right? Because, and then typically you're making, if a student knows about Colgate, then it's not really an elevator pitch, you're just like launching right into it. So my vision of like an elevator pitch, I'm just volunteering myself to do that, but is, I'm imagining a college fair scenario, you got maybe 30 seconds with a kid, they come up and they say, oh, Colgate, what's Colgate? Or my dad went to Colgate, but I don't really know anything about Colgate, or something like that. And what do you say in that scenario? And I mean, I typically do the big small thing because I think you can just do so much of it while framing Colgate as a big small place. So I say like, you know, and I'm very careful. Sometimes I will actually not even say the word liberal arts because I think either if a student is not highly aware of liberal arts, it just causes more questions, or it causes them to think, oh, I'm not a liberal arts student, and they don't actually kind of know what that means. But describing the features of liberal arts is totally good. But if I do say liberal arts, I'm really careful to say liberal arts and sciences in crowds like that, because liberal arts is short for liberal arts and sciences, and there's like a 50% chance you're talking to like a bio major, or, you know, and they're like, liberal arts, nope, next school. If they're like, you know, if they're not quite there yet. So yeah, I'll, you know, residential campus, upstate New York, or central New York State, but literally anywhere else in the world, we're upstate New York, so that people know where upstate New York is. Yeah, 2,900 undergraduate students, 9-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio, 100% of our courses taught by professors, 56 different major programs, 65% of our students study abroad, 83% of our students do research, and yeah, I mean, that's my like, boom, 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 boom.
Yeah. I think the takeaway here is that for my world, when I travel internationally, I tend to do a lot of college fairs and like mini fairs and elevator pitches. But usually at a high school visit, it's what Lynn said, where you do like a very short, like, this is my name, this is the school that I'm from, this is where we are. But you do then have to break and then ask them what they want to know, and then go back to these points. One of the reasons that we wanted to start with an elevator pitch is because sometime you'll cover a college fair and you need to do it, and it might be helpful to learn the new language so that you know how to pull it out when a student is asking you to elaborate. So if you have those elevator pitch bullets in your head, it can be easier to know like what you have to go to and have to hit and highlight when you're talking to a student about career services. You have to highlight when to call. Cool. So thank you for that. And some of your work might be, like Emily said, she's like, I haven't done a college fair in this kind of ways in like almost 2 years. And I'm going to be doing USA colleges in London, so I gotta figure out.
I don't need to give this pitch.
So in London, she's like, I gotta figure out how to talk about this. So she's like, I guess I have to book time in my calendar to go through this and figure it out. So I would invite you guys to do that too if you've discovered that you want more time to hammer this out. It's way better to do it in August than in my case, like, I'm glad I did it beforehand because I'm on stage in front of 400 people.
If anybody wants a buddy, I am happy to be that buddy. So I was like, wow, I have not talked about Colgate in an under 60 seconds context in 2 years.
Really?
Yeah, because the only fairs that I covered last year were in Connecticut. And then they're just like, tell me about Pecan right now. I already follow all the professors on Twitter, but tell me about it now.
Hi, I'm Grace Weaver.
I visited 4 times.
Yeah, exactly.
I sleep in the corridor of residence hall.
Most everybody else probably has some sort of college fair like that, though. We don't do a ton of them. We don't do like pancakes and stuff, but yeah.
I got it.
Yeah.
I had a few actually. I got
Fairs is
seven.
like.
I do, yeah. Even though they're in even though like I'm in the Northeast, there's a lot of.
Yeah.
In college fairs, you find a lot of people that just still don't know about Colgate. It's a very different world than that.
Are you covering once a month? Yeah. I'll talk to you offline about a great kid I met in China who goes to North But the other thing that we were going to talk about now, which we don't have to, because in the interest of time, but one thing I want you guys, and Emily and I want you guys to think about is how to take kind of the big ideas you've been talking about in this section and how to build your visit to scale. So sometimes you have 20 minutes in a break between classes, sometimes you have 45 minutes, sometimes you think you have 45 minutes, but you show up 10 minutes late because things outside of your control. But just kind of have a game plan or build time in your schedule to go over a game plan or find a buddy to practice for what you cut, what you don't cut, what are the things that you have to talk about before you walk out. If I'm going to visit Emily and all she wants to know about is English department and Pulitzer Prize winning professor. We spent a long time talking about that. Do I reserve like 2 minutes to talk to her about the other things that she probably should know, like how she should go ED because she goes to a prep school in Baltimore, or like, or what else do I have to build into the visit? So just think about how you want to build a Lego house of your visit and what you want to put to scale.
I thought that was like a low-key Ed Sheeran reference, but it's just me. That's all we got.
Before we fully move on here, can we go back to the ED conversation for just a minute? I'm wondering, when you have students or parents or counselors who are concerned about financial aid packaging with ED, what are some of the talking points that you use to make it seem like a viable option?
The appeals process.
Those are some of the most difficult because they're nervous that they won't get the package they need to enroll. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to push them into, I mean, we want them to apply ED and we know that their package is probably going to be pretty competitive, but like, there's a chance it won't be, or they're expecting way more than they're actually eligible for. Mm-hmm. And so it's really tough. I mean, we have the tools, we have the net price calculator, are we on My Intuition now? Or is that officially happening? I know Gina was talking about it.
I know she said that there was going to be an update to the net price calculator, and it'll be published in the end of August. Okay. So I assumed that meant we were moving vendors.
But we have to keep the other one also.
Yeah, we have to keep the, whatever we have for federal regulations.
Yeah.
But My Intuition is like really way easier for students. Anyway, so like we have the tools, there's the appeals process. Yeah, I will say yes, there's an appeals process. If someone brings it up, I don't lead with that. But the other thing is, I say, we want you to get a really good estimate. If it doesn't look realistic, you probably should not apply early decision. But if it does look realistic, but you're still worried, I say at the end of the day, if it absolutely does not work for a family, we're not going to put you in prison. You know what I mean? If you have to go somewhere else, we're not going to like charge you for a year's tuition or something like that. Like obviously we do not want it to get there. But if it looks realistic on the surface, if Colgate is your top choice, if the net price calculator is telling you the right things, then you should strongly consider ED.
If they haven't done the net price calculator, I usually encourage them to find some time to do the net price calculator, and then they can call me and we can talk about that. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times you never hear from them again because it was good or bad and they just made a decision. And then if they're in that, sort of ambiguous category of like, oh, like it's good if it's this, but if it's not, then maybe they can get counsel. Usually there's a concern that there's extenuating circumstances. And that's usually when I say if there are extenuating circumstances, you'd probably have to go through appeals process anyway. Yeah. But if you have documentation that shows excessive medical bills or other pieces, then they will take that into account. There's really not a place on the application itself, or definitely on the net price calculator for any exceptions. That is typically handled through the appeals process. Mm-hmm. I also recommend that no family who needs financial aid should apply early decision without doing a net price calculator.
Yep.
Like they should always, always, always do the net price calculator. Because you want to know what you're getting into. But I think sometimes there's a concern about how honest can we be. And I mean, I haven't been fired yet. I try to be incredibly transparent about our process. So if families are like, we'll release you from your, if you're in a not cursory conversation, but if you're having a one-on-one thorough conversation with a family, I will be very clear that there is an appeals process and we will let you out of your early decision agreement, but you do need to forego your offer of admission.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times people think, oh great, I can just be out of the early decision and still be just be a regular admit. So I think it is important that we help them see the entire process and not be misleading about that, because this is like a human process, and you don't want someone to get into or feel pressured into a situation where then at the end of the day, they're going to have to say, I can't go to Colgate at all because I couldn't accept this package early. And for that family, if they don't want to be in that bind, regular is the best way to go. And part of our job is to help counsel them in the process, not just make them feel this pressure of early decision, but our package will be the same early as it is regular. That's one thing we can agree. And that's typically what makes it easier for families to forego the admission, is when we say, this package isn't going to change in August. Like you're still, or in April, you're still going to have the same, we're giving, whatever you can't come to an agreement on now, it's going to be the same in April. So usually families are okay to back out of that, but feel really comfortable to help them understand the full situation and know what the risks are.
And it seems like it might be helpful to lead with some of this too when we are talking about early decision as a whole and pushing early decision, because I think many students do write it off as that's not an option for me because I'll be financially. So we may want to stress that with all students.
Yeah.
And talk about financially.
I think it's good to say we meet 100% of needs for students to apply early decision just like we do for regular decision.
The reason I think we're sharing this is because when we being, I think it was myself, Drew, Gary, Sue, but Gary travels, but Sue doesn't travel. When he was asking us, do you actually encourage early decision applications? Like, do you talk about that in school visits and in information sessions? We were very candid to say, no, that currently has not been part of our our sale or even a message, maybe with a counselor individually, but it's not wholesale. And so we have been a little passive, I think, about the importance of early decision, and yet then we are admitting students in committee that are never getting in regular.
And we have peers that are doing so much more than we're not even going to start doing yet, but sending letters to students who would be unlikely regular candidates that would have a shot early and saying, hey, you have a shot early, but you're not going to get in regular, basically. We have a lot of peers that do that.
Yeah.
So
we, on the scale of how aggressive you can be about the early decision message, we are not on the radar currently.
Yeah.
and we don't want to go to a place that feels totally uncomfortable. So you just have to read the situation. And there are going to be some places where we would fully support you to not even bring up early decision because it's not appropriate for where the students are at.
The other piece I'll mention about the net price calculator is that it's only for students who are U.S. citizens or permanent residents. If you're working with undocumented students or international students, that is not a possible tool for them to use. So it becomes a lot harder when they're but what could I get? I basically refer them to financially to talk it through because we just don't know. I have to,
Is this other tool something we can use?
They talk about
There is
I think
on there.
I've seen solutions. If I'm living in the United States, I'm a citizen or not, and you're telling me I can't, but no, that's very small.
Because the thing that Gina was telling me is because the enterprise calculator uses W-2s and information that you only get if you're paying taxes. Right. What I don't know, and maybe it's a question for you and I to ask in our meeting that we have to schedule with Gina, is what happens where if a parent is undocumented, but they have they work in the U.S. and they have W-2s, they have all these things. That's what I don't know. But if you're a Chinese kid at a boarding school in the U.S., your parents probably aren't applying for aid anyway, but your parents aren't going to be able to use an enterprise calculator.
But as an undocumented student, guess what I'm thinking?
It looks like that it works for undocumented students, but not for international students. This is the Northwestern one anyway.
Yeah, same
I've
for
gotten to step 5 of 7.
Colorado. So if you select international, it says,
Only doing financial.
given the differences in complexity of international financial profiles, this was Duke, Quick College cost estimator is only able to provide estimate costs for U.S. citizens or U.S. permanent residents of the United States.
So, in thinking about this.
Yeah, living in the United States, if you're an expat, it doesn't work either.
Actually, I can bring it up then.
Yeah, if you're an expat, it doesn't work.
Would people feel comfortable, and again, thinking about like starting this earlier with people, and trying to encourage them to think about ED, something I think we can take advantage of is like other workshops that we do where we like everyone in the room does their net price calculator and we talk about like what are you saying and like what questions do you have? This is how aid works here, these are the things that you might consider. And encourage them to think about the fact that one of the reasons the FAFSA changed and they're doing prior years so you can do these things earlier. So encouraging students when you're on the road is that I know you may not know if you're ready to apply ED somewhere, but you can still start your financial aid now. Like it's October.
I mean, that's actually, if I'm working with juniors, one of the first tips I have, it's important for your college search to know what types of schools you need to look at. There's the academic search, but then there's also the financial aid search. You need to know what does it's great that schools meet 100% of need, but are you going to be in that upper middle class range that makes this uncomfortable and you might need to look at merit-based schools, or is it going to swing you towards state schools? Like, this is something that should be baseline. If you're gonna do anything in sophomore or junior year, like you should be doing this type of discovery to understand what your family unit is, and especially for families who are very concerned about the cost of education, they are often pleasantly surprised about packaging in full need-based institutions. So I don't know, I mean, this is a good thing about, is it something we could potentially introduce to certain groups that are here? The challenge is then you only have students, and what do they might know that we, feel comfortable or struggle for money, but they may not have the details of being able to execute a net price calculator. But we could even run through some scenarios that might be helpful, just on average family incomes and what that looks like in a net price calculator situation. I don't know, just something to think about because that cost and attainability piece is so critical. And if we want to increase our early decision applications, the biggest concern I have is that we want to diversify that growth. We don't want it to just be from the full pay applicants when we're thinking about the goals we have to shape our class. Right. Seems like there's a lot of work we need to do.
And it can be a nice way to phrase it where like Colgate wants to languaging it differently and better, but kind of like we are a predominantly white institution. We do want to have an increased student body, and so we do want those students who want Colgate, just like everyone else. When a student, it's a priority for our institution to have a really diverse student body. So when we see a student who goes Colgate, who's ED, who's also represents, something that's not like full pay white, obviously phrased differently. That's something that we are excited about in ED. Something along the vein of that sentiment that's phrased much better. Because that was terrible, but.
What might be really good too, sorry for the people who have early travel, but it might be really interesting for the staff with early travel. Julie, who's not here, but staff with early travel to maybe give some feedback on, languaging or things that work, or, if counselors being receptive, just how. I don't think our school visit's going to be holistically different. The message is a little bit different, but we are going to ask when appropriate for this ED conversation to come in. And it just might be interesting to get some early indicators of any reaction responses. I mean, there's going to be definitely pushback from some counselors, but it's not a different message than you're hearing at other schools. All right, maybe a quick break and we'll get back together at 11. The 10:30 to 11 was meant to be the counselor meeting, but we've talked a little bit about that. I actually want to break things down into 4 categories. I think we can run through that relatively quickly, and then also we can talk about, I only had about 15 minutes to highlight some things that are critical about making sure we're doing appropriate updates from the road, but I think we can make up some time in this next section.
Bathroom break, water break. Right back to the things you forgot to print this morning.
Yes. You could probably have an intern run them up too.